Welcome to a deep dive into some, well, pretty fundamental questions about how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, we're tackling the really big stuff today. What makes you, you, how your mind works, and how all that connects to things like memory, morality, even just your daily habits.
Absolutely. And we're doing it by unpacking a whole stack of sources, grabbing insights from, classic philosophy, but also modern research papers.
Think of this as getting a kind of shortcut to understanding some incredibly complex topics. Without having to wade through all the dense text yourself, we're here to pull out the surprising bits, the key ideas.
And hopefully make it engaging. Our mission is really just to help you get a handle on these fascinating perspectives.
Ready to jump in.
Okay, let's unpack this. So we're starting with someone who really shook things up in how we think about the mind, David Hume. He had this very straightforward starting point. All our ideas ultimately come from what he called impressions.
Right, basically raw sensory experience. He was all about grounding our understanding in what we actually see, hear, touch, feel. Complex ideas, for Hume, are just built up from these simpler sensory bits.
And he gave us this, incredibly sharp tool for figuring out which ideas are solid and which might just be flights of fancy. It's often called Hume's fork.
Hume's fork, yeah, it's like a sorting machine for our thoughts. On one side, you have relations of ideas. These are truths you figure out just by thinking, like in math or logic.
Okay, like the Pythagorean theorem. You don't need to go measure triangles.
Exactly. You know it's true because of the logical relationship between the ideas themselves. Then, on the other side, you have matters of fact.
And these are about the real world.
Right, like the sun will rise tomorrow. Their truth depends on how the universe actually works. You need experience, observation to check them out.
So this fork helps separate, what's purely thought versus what's based on reality, and helps us spot ideas that don't really fit either.
Precisely. It's a way to clear the deck, potentially getting rid of ideas that just come from, say, wishful thinking or unfounded belief, leaving you with things you can actually build knowledge on.
Okay, let's see how he applied this. What about space? We usually think of space as this big, empty container.
Hume would say, hold on a sec. He argued our idea of space comes only from our senses, sight and touch. It's not some independent thing out there. It's more like a secondary quality, dependent on our perception.
Like color depends on our eyes?
Kind of like that, yeah. You don't perceive infinitely divisible space. You experience finite, colored, solid shapes, and your imagination structures them.
So the abstract idea of endless empty space that comes from getting confused about our actual sensory experiences.
That's his argument, basically. It's built up from the bits and pieces we perceive, not handed to us as some abstract concept.
Okay, what about cause and effect? That's a big one. We see one thing happen, then another, and we just assume the first caused the second. There's a necessary link, right?
This is where Hume gets really famous and maybe controversial. He broke down the idea of cause into three parts. A happens before B, that's priority. A and B are close together, proximity. And the tricky one, there's a necessary connection between them.
Priority and proximity seem straightforward. Our senses pick those up.
Yep, easy enough to trace back to impressions. But that necessary connection, Hume looked everywhere for the impression this idea comes from. And he argued you don't see necessity out in the world.
You just see A, then B, again and again.
Exactly, what he called constant conjunction. You don't see the invisible string pulling B after A.
And you don't find it inside yourself either, like willing your arm to move.
He argued that's mysterious too. We don't have a clear impression of how our will causes motion. So if we don't experience this necessary link directly, where does the idea of it come from?
Okay, I feel a twist coming.
Hume's answer: habit. When you see A followed by B over and over, the sun rising, dropping a ball and it falling, your mind forms a habit, an expectation. This expectation, this internal feeling of anticipating B after A, that, he said, is the impression from which the idea of necessary connection is copied.
Wow. So the feeling of necessity is really just a strong feeling in us that we then project onto the world.
That's the core idea. The mistake for Hume is thinking that necessity is some power in the objects themselves, rather than a product of our own minds conditioned by repeated experience.
Okay. He applied this kind of thinking to free will too, right? Liberty and necessity.
He did. Hume actually argued for necessity in human actions. He believed our actions are caused by our motives, our personality, our circumstances.
Like billiard balls, predictable.
Pretty much. He argued that just like billiard balls move predictably after being struck, human actions follow predictably from their causes if you knew all the factors.
But that feels so counterintuitive. We feel like we choose freely.
Hume knew that. He said people mistake a feeling of looseness or indifference when they act that feeling that you could have done otherwise right then for actual proof of an uncaused will. But he argued this feeling doesn't change the fact that the action was caused by underlying motives and character, which are often predictable.
So you'd point to how we rely on people acting predictably all the time.
Exactly. In friendships, business, expecting laws to be followed, even a prisoner expecting the executioner to do their job. We count on cause and effect in human behavior.
Okay, he also looked at emotions, or passions as he called them.
Right. He classified them as impressions of reflection, reactions to our own thoughts or other impressions. He split them into calm passions, like the feeling you get from moral approval or appreciating art, and violent ones.
Like joy, grief, love, hate.
Yes, those big ones. Some are instinctive, like hunger. Others are more learned or socially conditioned.
And this leads to maybe his most famous, most provocative claim about reason and emotion.
Definitely. He argued that reason is completely inert when it comes to actually motivating us to do anything. Actions, he said, must always be prompted by a passion, an emotion, a desire. Reason's job is just to figure out the best way to get what the passion wants.
So reason is just the navigator, but the passions are driving the car.
That's a great way to put it. He famously said, reason is, and ought only to be the slave of the passions, and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them. Reason doesn't set the destination.
Wow. Okay. And briefly, he also looked critically at religious belief.
Just touching on the sources here. On miracles, he basically said the evidence for the laws of nature based on constant experience is always going to be stronger than testimony claiming a violation of those laws, like a scale tipping.
In the origin of religion.
He argued it likely arose naturally from human feelings like fear and hope, leading first to belief in many gods polytheism, rather than starting with reason or revelation pointing to one god. He was generally quite skeptical.
Okay, finally, his take on morality. What did he think morality wasn't?
Well, first, it wasn't about rational judgments or logical relations like some other philosophers thought. He had this funny example.
The tree killing its parent.
Right. A sapling overshadowing and killing the parent tree has the same biological relationship as parricide, but we don't call the tree immoral, so morality can't just be about abstract relations.
And it's not just about objective facts in the world either.
No. He said if you examine a vicious act like willful murder, you find facts about the action, the motives, the consequences, but you don't see the vice itself as a fact out there.
So where is the vice?
It's in you. It's the feeling of disapproval, the sentiment you have when you contemplate the act. And this is where he saw people making a key mistake, jumping from descriptions of what is, the facts, to prescriptions of what ought to be, the moral judgment, that famous is-ought gap.
So if morality isn't reason or fact, what is moral approval for Hume?
It's an emotional response, a feeling, specifically the feeling of approval or disapproval from the viewpoint of an informed, impartial spectator.
Like judging a play. You feel approval or disapproval for the character's actions.
Exactly. That feeling is the moral judgment, and it doesn't have to be direct observation. We react morally to stories, history, things we hear about. He also distinguished between natural virtues like benevolence, which seem innate, and artificial ones like justice, which are necessary for social order but arise from convention.
So wrapping up Hume.
Huh?
What's the big takeaway from his toolkit?
He gives us this powerful, experience-based way of looking at the mind. He suggests much of what we take as objective truths about the world, things like causality, maybe even space, and certainly morality, are actually, in large part, products of our own minds, built from sensory input, shaped profoundly by habit and feeling. Reason plays a role, but it's often serving our deeper desires. It's a very human picture.
Okay, that was a fascinating journey into Hume. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Let's think about memory itself, not just how it helps form ideas, but the ethics surrounding it.
It's a huge area. You know, traditionally, a lot of the talk about memory ethics focused on collective memory, how societies remember big historical events, especially bad ones like atrocities or genocide.
Right, the whole duty to remember idea.
Exactly. Which events demand remembrance, often negative ones tied to responsibility or justice, and how societies remember memorials, museums, that's all part of it. Plus, how much focus should the past get compared to present needs? that balance shifts.
But more recently, the focus seems to be turning more towards individual memory ethics.
Yes, definitely. Especially as cognitive science tells us more about how memory actually works, and you see memory issues coming up in legal cases. This brings up some really tricky personal ethical questions.
Like, is it ever okay, even good, to forget?
That's one of the most interesting debates. Forgetting often gets a bad rap, right? It can seem like avoiding responsibility.
Sure, like forgetting a promise or a debt.
But it can also be seen as ethically positive. Maybe forgetting, or at least lessening the emotional sting of a memory, is crucial for healing, for moving on, for forgiveness, especially after trauma.
There's that whole debate about forgiveness and forgetting.
Right. Does forgiveness require forgetting? Some say no. Forgetting makes genuine forgiveness impossible. Others argue forgiveness might involve a kind of active forgetting that transforms the memory's weight without actually erasing the facts.
But how much control do we even have over forgetting? Is it something we're responsible for?
Another tricky point from the sources. Some argue forgetting is largely involuntary, which might suggest a kind of right to forget things beyond our control.
But we do try to forget things sometimes, or try hard to remember.
And others argue memory is partly controllable through attention, rehearsal, avoidance, implying there could be some responsibility. So whether forgetting is morally okay might depend on the intent or the situation. Forgetting under stress is different from deliberately trying to suppress a memory of wrongdoing.
What about when forgetting is linked to brain issues, like amnesia or dementia?
Yeah, that gets really complex legally and morally. Culpability for actions can change dramatically if someone's memory is significantly impaired. It digs into questions about personal identity. Are you the same person if you don't remember? And the difficulty of proving a memory lapse is genuine.
Okay, moving from accidental forgetting to deliberate change, memory erasure or modification. This sounds like something out of, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
It does. But research is happening using drugs, brain stimulation, maybe future implants that could potentially allow us to dampen or even erase specific memories. And this, understandably, sparks huge ethical debates.
What are the main worries there?
Well, a really big one is the impact on personal identity. If our memories are a huge part of who we are, what happens if we start editing them? Could it mess with our sense of self, our life narrative, maybe even change our personality in ways we don't intend?
And it seems like memories are crucial for learning from mistakes, right?
Absolutely. Memories, even painful ones, are vital for moral development, for feeling appropriate emotions like regret or empathy, for learning not to repeat harmful actions. Tampering with them could undermine our moral sensibilities. Philosophers disagree on the implications, though. Some see a major threat to identity, others see potential for self-improvement.
Is there talk about a freedom of memory, like a right to control your own memories?
Yes, that concept comes up. The idea that you should have the right to remember, modify, or dampen your memories without interference. So things like therapists implanting false memories or coercive interrogations that distort memory, those would be clear violations.
But surely there have to be limits to that freedom.
Oh, definitely. What if erasing your memory harms someone else, like a criminal erasing their memory of the crime to escape justice? That's a problem. There are also worries about exploitation or the weird situation where you erase a memory, but someone else still has it.
What about for traumatic memories? That seems like the most compelling reason to want to modify memory.
Generally, yes. Reducing the intense emotional suffering from trauma is seen as probably the most ethically justifiable use of this kind of potential technology. But even then, there are social concerns. Could it let perpetrators off easily? Could it erase important historical witness testimony?
Is there a duty for victims to remember trauma?
That's debated. Some argue that putting a duty to remember on victims is an unreasonable burden. They should have the right to decide how to cope, whether that's privately, publicly, or seeking ways to diminish the memory's impact without an obligation to testify for society's sake.
So memory modification. It's not simple.
Not at all. The sources really emphasize needing a balanced, case-by-case approach, weighing individual well-being and autonomy against potential social harms, especially as the tech gets closer to reality.
And the flip side, enhancing memory, making it better.
Right, improving memory function. If it's therapeutic, say for dementia, is generally seen as a good thing, less controversial.
But what about just boosting normal memory, like cognitive enhancement?
That's where it gets more contentious, part of those broader post-humanist debates. Is there a right to enhance your memory? Maybe even a duty in some cases, like for eyewitnesses, if it helps achieve justice. Enhanced memory could be great for learning, reasoning.
But what are the downsides?
Well, Safety and efficacy always. But also, could perfect recall be overwhelming? Could it actually impair focus or abstract thought? Then there are the bigger worries about changing human nature, or even, futuristic risks like brainjacking someone. Yes, Locke argued identity is about psychological continuity, specifically memory. Being able to remember past thoughts and actions as your own is what makes you the same person. His example was the madman and the sober man. If the sober self doesn't remember the mad actions, they aren't the same person in the sense that matters for responsibility.
People debated why identity mattered, but agreed it did.
Right. Critics like Reed and Butler focused on a persistent substance, like a soul, but Locke insisted his consciousness view actually lined up better with how we treat responsibility, especially in cases of amnesia.
But then the philosopher Derek Parfit comes along and really challenges our basic intuitions about identity.
He really does. Parfit uses these clever, sometimes unsettling thought experiments, cases where our usual idea of identity just doesn't seem to give a clear answer, like trying to decide if a ship rebuilt plank by plank is the same ship.
What beliefs does he target?
He challenges two main beliefs. One, that questions like, is this future person me, must always have a definite yes or no answer. And two, that personal identity, this strict one-to-one relationship, is actually what's most important for our survival.
And the classic thought experiment here is the brain division one.
That's the mind bender. Imagine your brain is perfectly divided and each hemisphere is transplanted into a new identical body, both resulting people wake up with your character, your memories, your plans. What happened to you?
Yeah, our language breaks down. Am I neither of them? Am I somehow both? How can one person become two?
Exactly the puzzle. Parfit argues it's not absurd to say you survive as both. He even points to real-life split-brain patients who seem to have two separate streams of consciousness. He pushes it further, imagining voluntarily dividing your mind.
But wait, how can we talk about their memories being your memories if they aren't strictly you?
This is where Parfit introduces some new terms. Q-memoral and contention. Q stands for quasi. Q memory is having a memory belief about a past experience that was had by someone, and your belief is caused in the right way by that past experience, and it happened to someone psychologically continuous with you. It captures the memory link without presupposing strict identity.
So it describes the psychological connection without forcing the word identity.
Precisely. Contention is similar for future actions. In the brain division case, the original person can remember the past and contend the futures of both resulting people, because both are psychologically continuous with the original.
And he considered the opposite too. Fusion. Two people merging.
Yes. Imagine two people merging into one, and the resulting person remembers experiences from both original lives. This further suggests that survival might be more like a matter of degree, depending on the extent of psychological connection, rather than an all-or-nothing identity switch.
Okay, so what's Parfit's central point then? What really matters?
He argues that psychological continuity and connectedness, the overlapping chains of cue memories, contentions, character traits, etc., with the right kind of cause, that's what's truly important for survival. Identity is a strict one-to-one relation, but psychological continuity can be one-many, like division, or many-one, like fusion.
So in continuity branches, the language of identity gets us into trouble.
Exactly. Instead of forcing the question, which one is me, Parfit suggests we should just say, I survive as both, and recognize that what matters, the psychological continuity, is fully present in both branches.
Thinking about it like branching lines over time. Survival is about how much connection flows along those lines.
That's the picture. And survival can be a matter of degree based on how strong that psychological connectedness is. Parfit thinks this way of thinking is less misleading and better captures what we actually care about when we think about our future.
Let's bring in another really powerful perspective on who we are, this time from Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who put a huge emphasis on the lived body and habit.
Merleau-Ponty really pushed back against separating mind and body. He saw our bodily actions, our behavior, as already full of intention and understanding. The body isn't just a vehicle for the mind.
It's not just a machine the mind pilots.
Far from it. He argued that habit is a prime example of embodied consciousness. The body itself learns and adapts to meaning in the world. He talked about our corporeal existence, our lived body, as this unique kind of reality, unifying the purely physiological and the purely psychological.
And the lived body relates to lived space.
Yes. The world isn't just objectively out there, it's structured by our body's potential for action. Habit is the body's way of understanding this world. He called it operant intentionality, the body responding intelligently to the world's invitations before conscious thought kicks in.
like automatically reaching for a door handle or navigating a familiar room.
Exactly. Or knowing how to type without thinking about each key. It's a pre-reflexive understanding, an immediate grasp based on the body's accumulated knowledge. This challenges views of perception as just passive data intake. For Merleau-Ponty, perception is inherently active, tied to body movement.
And this body knowledge is stored somehow.
He talks about it being conserved in the body as a dynamic corporeal scheme. This is what allows us to feel at home in a familiar environment, to be in rapport with things because our body knows how to deal with them.
He made a distinction between different ways the body operates.
Yes, between the habitual body, that general pre-reflexive way we exist and move, and the actual body, which is involved in more conscious, personal, adaptive actions. Normally, these work together seamlessly.
He used examples of brain damage.
Right. Patients who could perform habitual movements, like touching their nose, but couldn't do the same movement if it required conscious adaptation, like touching their nose with a specific point on a ruler. It showed the difference between automatic bodily knowing and deliberate situational understanding. Healthy people switch fluidly.
So our practical ability to do things is fundamental.
Yes, he stressed the primacy of practical action. Knowing how to use something, how to navigate this, inhabiting the world, is a kind of knowledge that comes before conscious reflection. It's like having another self that has already sided with the world.
And habit develops through repetition.
Yes, but not just mechanical repetition. Think of learning to dance. The body gradually understands and traps the rhythm and movement, leading to mastery, where you don't consciously monitor every step. It responds fluidly to the situation.
And this allows us to extend our being.
Precisely. He said habit expresses the power we have of dilating our being in the world, like incorporating a tool, say a blind person's cane, until it feels like an extension of the body itself. This corporealization fits his view of the body and world being intrinsically linked.
And this whole perspective offers a different way to understand the mind than just, say, brain science.
Absolutely. Thinkers drawing on Merleau-Ponty, like Gallagher and Zahavi, argue that fully understanding consciousness requires paying attention to this first-person, lived, embodied experience phenomenology, not just objective, third-person science. The two should inform each other.
Okay, let's add one more quite different voice to this mix. Someone with a unique take on memory and identity. Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yeah. He saw both forgetting and remembering as crucial, even necessary for human flourishing, but in different ways. Forgetting allows for health and happiness, but memory is key for something else.
And he had this really striking, provocative idea about why we develop memory in the first place.
He did. He suggested, quite radically, that memory wasn't just for storing facts, but was essentially invented or bred into humans for one specific, crucial capacity: the act of promising.
Promising. How so?
It was tied to his idea of the sovereign individual. This is the person who is autonomous, has their own values, but crucially has the right to make promises and the strength to keep them. To do that, you need memory. You need to be able to hold yourself accountable across time to remember the obligation you made.
So memory allows for responsibility over time.
That's the core link for Nietzsche. This ability to remember your commitments, this awareness of responsibility burned into you, is what he connects to the origin of conscience. Memory makes promising possible, and promising makes responsibility and conscience possible.
That's a fascinating angle.
Yeah.
And the source contrasted this human memory with machine memory.
Right. It pointed out that machines are often built for perfect recall. They don't forget in the human way, where memories fade, merge, get reinterpreted, maybe even partly invented over time. Think about collective memory, like the spirit of the Blitz, which might evolve beyond the strict facts.
Machines lack that qualitative aspect.
Exactly. They don't have that aged recollection, that fluid, sometimes unreliable, but deeply human quality of memory that Nietzsche linked to our capacity for making and keeping promises, for being responsible agents.
So where does all this leave us? We've journeyed through some really different philosophical landscapes today, looking at the mind, memory, identity, the body.
Yeah, we saw Hume grounding so much of our understanding and experience, habit, and feeling, with reason maybe taking a back seat more often than we think.
Merleau-Ponty highlighted the deep intelligence of our lived body, how habit shapes our engagement with the world before we even think about it.
We grappled with the really naughty ethics of memory, the weight of remembering versus the need to forget, and the profound questions raised by technologies that might let us edit or boost our own pasts.
Locke, and especially Parfit, challenged our gut feelings about a fixed self, suggesting maybe psychological continuity is what really matters for survival. And that identity might be more like a flowing stream than a solid rock.
And Nietzsche gave us that sharp insight connecting memory specifically to our ability to promise to be responsible beings, contrasting it with the static nature of machine recall.
It definitely shows that simple answers about self, mind, memory, identity, they just don't cut it. These concepts are incredibly complex and tangled together.
Absolutely. And thinking through these different perspectives isn't just an academic exercise, is it? It gives you tools, frameworks to think more critically about your own experiences, why you feel certain ways, how your body just knows things, why some memories feel so core to who you are.
And how new technologies might fundamentally interact with or even change these basic aspects of being human. We've definitely taken a deep dive into some challenging but hopefully really rewarding ideas today.
Yeah, exploring these viewpoints on memory, identity, the mind, it helps make sense of ourselves and maybe helps navigate a world where technology keeps pushing these boundaries.
What really stands out to you from all this exploration? What's the idea that lodges in your mind?
And maybe consider this question Parfit leaves us with. If psychological continuity is what matters most, and it can be a matter of degree, or even branch out into multiple futures, how does that change the way you think about your connection to your past self, or maybe how you plan for or even worry about your own future?
Definitely something to mull over as you go about your day.